Well, I'm right now joined by Dr. Robert Alexander. He's a professor of political science at Bowling Green State University. And BGSU just came out with an October poll, which polled a variety of Ohioans on a variety of issues. I do want to just first start with a quote that you have in this poll that says, although Donald Trump has enjoyed great electoral success in Ohio, we find that his favorability has declined steadily in the first year of his second term. Many of his policies are not especially popular, and his favorability has dropped 9 points from February to October, where he is now below water with a negative 10 favorability rating. I just wonder, Donald Trump has performed well in Ohio. All three campaigns he ran, he's won the state. And so, what is behind this shift by Ohio voters in terms of their feelings about the president?
Sure. So, like when you have a questionnaire or survey like we have, you're not necessarily put up against anyone if you're just kind of asking, like, do you approve or disapprove of somebody's job, right? How are they doing in office? Or do you like this person? Do you not like this person? But if you have a campaign, you have choices, and you're choosing between Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And if you really don't like either choice, it very well is. I'm sure you've heard it many a time. It's the lesser of two evils, and I think that that's something that we've seen in Ohio and some of our campaign outcomes is that people aren't particularly happy with either choice. And Donald Trump, and certainly the Democratic Party has also been, so this is kind of another point, has the brand has not been good in the state. So if you're not feeling too good about the party brand, then the Republican brand is looking a little bit better to you. So, yes, he's done really, really well head to head in elections against Democrats. But there's some things that people like about Trump in the state of Ohio, and then there's some things that particularly Democrats and also independents, and that's kind of that key demographic that is always important in campaigns.
Yeah, and especially in this polarized era of politics, it's about winning the middle voters. Your party's voters are going to likely vote for the candidate at the top of the ticket regardless. And so it's always so important to have favorability with those voters. And I know you mentioned that in that quote, these policies that the president has promoted aren't exactly popular. So where are Ohioans expressing concern?
Well, we've been asking the same question on what's the most important issue facing the country, and it has been inflation in the economy. It was still inflation in the economy in this last poll that we did. Inflation has become a little less important, but that's in part because a lot of Democrats are throwing out threats to democracy as one of the more important issues. We added political polarization as a topic, as a potential, is this an important issue? There was a significant number of folks that said political polarization was an issue. So those are kind of bigger issues, I think, more about his own favorability. Like, again, do we like this person or not? But the threats to democracy, I think, is also speaking to issues like ICE and the National Guard. And so we did ask some very specific questions about ICE and the National Guard. And again, Republicans generally supportive of policies relating to ICE and the National Guard. Democrats vehemently opposed. And it turns out that independents also do not like policies related to you know, ICE, folks in unmarked cars, or if we're talking about, being masked to perform your duties. Not real pleased with that. Uh, Turning back to the economy, I think this is pretty telling. I think it was 56%, something like
Right.
that think that they're in worse shape today than they were last year as far as the economy goes for the nation. That's again, if you're riding into the presidency with this belief that you're going to help us economically, and a majority of voters feel like the country's in worse shape today than they were before. That's not a good thing. And then lastly, the tariffs. We didn't ask a ton of questions about tariffs in this poll. We did ask them in our April poll, but on the tariffs, again, that's something that Republicans have pretty much been lockstep with Trump on a lot of issues. That's one that you see some leakage among Republicans, where there's a significant amount of Republicans that are maybe not so excited about the tariffs, and a large number that believe that the wealthy are going to benefit from tariffs or large corporations are going to benefit from tariffs. and not so many people thinking that the middle class or the working class are going to benefit from tariffs. So that's certainly something I would keep my eye on in a state like Ohio that's a pretty strong industrial state.
And also, given that midterms are next year, this can kind of be viewed as a concern because obviously the president, he talked a lot about winning on a mandate. He believed he had a mandate of lowering grocery prices or making things more affordable. Given that Ohioans don't exactly feel like the economy has improved, what does that mean going into next year's midterms?
Well, you're spot on, Jaden, in that analysis. That is that midterm elections are always about the party that's in office, the president that's in office. So even though Donald Trump won't be on the ticket, his shadow will be on the ticket. And so this will be, and we saw this in 2018. Democrats had essentially a record-setting year, 44 seats in the House of Representatives. It really was a blue wave. And also in 22, even though Joe Biden wasn't on the ticket, you saw Republicans do okay. But a lot of those strongly endorsed Trump candidates in 2022 in that midterm election did not fare incredibly well. And so if Trump himself is not actually on the ticket. He's not bringing some of his voters to the polls. And it really does then permit those Democrats that don't feel very good about him and those independents that get jazzed up a little bit about midterm elections to turn out. So environments generally are not very helpful to the incumbent party. So this is something that certainly Republicans need to be paying attention to in Ohio and beyond if they want to keep their majority in the House and in the Senate. And certainly we've got some big races in our state in 2026 as well.
And I definitely want to talk about those big races next. Ohio has long had this reputation of being a purple state, but in recent years kind of shifted more to a red state. And this poll was interesting because it shows that there may be a little bit of competitiveness in these statewide races that you just normally don't see. So, kind of expand on that.
So yeah, Ohio has always been the bellwether. We've kind of really taken that as a point of pride that so goes Ohio, goes the nation, and that has not been the case during the Trump era of campaigns. Ohio has been to the right of the nation politically. We had essentially 11-point Trump victory in the state of Ohio, while you saw 1 to 2% across the country. So that's a pretty significant Republican lean. Democratic candidates have not done well in the state of Ohio for decades now. Only in so far as national environments have been helpful to Democratic candidates. So the purple state is a big question mark, and yet you do see some signs that maybe Ohioans aren't as far to the right as campaign outcomes might suggest. So, for instance, if you go back to, I think it was 2023,
Right.
and we had our elections, kind of these statewide elections on abortion and on gerrymandering. You have these issue elections come up, and the state of Ohio votes pretty strongly to sanction abortion rights and basically codify Roe versus Wade in the state of Ohio to allow for marijuana,
Recreational cannabis. Yeah.
recreational cannabis. So those would not be seen as traditional conservative issues, and yet they passed pretty strongly in this state, which would suggest, again, I mentioned the Democratic brand. The Democratic brand wasn't tied to those issues, right? So if it's about issues, Ohioans might be a little bit more to the middle. Uh, Ohioans have forever been very strongly attracted to populism. We like populism. We like populist candidates. Barack Obama did not get elected in the state of Ohio not being a populist. He was talking about Main Street rather than Wall Street. He was going to the people, talking about organizing. So, that recent history isn't too far in our rearview mirror. And it speaks to, Ohioans don't like to be told what to do. They want to they want to kind of be, large and in charge. So when the legislature is saying, we want to make it harder for you to put issues on the ballot, Ohioans rejected that pretty resoundingly. So I think what we're seeing here is in part Democratic brand has not been very strong. Republican brand has been a little stronger. And that's probably because there's been more of a feeling among Ohio voters that the Republican Party wants to support more grassroots efforts among Ohio voters. When that comes into conflict with Ohio voters, they reject it. And we've seen that in some recent elections. So Sherrod Brown, as you mentioned, he has been a populist through and through, and he has a populist message, and he will continue to beat that populist drum moving forward. Amy Acton, and in her advertising that she's done, she hasn't gone full on board with her advertising, but some of her social media posts are projecting Vivek Ramaswamy as somebody who is an outsider coming into Ohio for their own personal gain, and that she's a person of the people. And again, I think that this kind of populist rhetoric and populist action is what Democrats will have to do in an effort to be competitive in 2026.
Yeah, and looking back at 2024 in that U.S. Senate race where we had Bernie Moreno up against Sherrod Brown, with Sherrod Brown losing by about 3.2 points, it wasn't a significant margin. What do you think that suggests about the Brown versus Husted matchup we're going to see next year?
That tells you a lot. So again, that we know that there were voters that went into the ballot box that voted directly for Donald Trump, and then in the next instance voted for Sherrod Brown. So we know that we have some Trump Brown voters out there. In fact, Sherrod Brown received more votes than Kamala Harris did in the state of Ohio. That's unique. And so Brown overperformed relative to Harris by essentially 7 to 8 points. So if Donald Trump's not on the ticket, what does that mean for a Sherrod Brown race? John Husted did not, he's won statewide election. You would think he would be pretty well known in the state. And our poll suggests that there's a lot of folks that don't have their minds made up on John Husted, neither favorable nor unfavorable. Um, he was appointed to the position. So, Sherrod Brown, a lot of name recognition. I would be surprised if this race isn't within the margin of error in either direction. I think it is still, a tough race for Democrats in this state. I think if you had to put your thumb on the scale to favor one candidate over another, Republicans are probably the favored party. But I would expect it to be competitive for some of these national environment issues that you see. And again, the play in, the lean into populism, especially if people aren't feeling so good about the economy, if they don't feel so good about, if they think that law and order is law and order um, that is maybe authoritarian. And I think that that's one of the things that you kind of saw some significant leakage in our respondents among different subgroups when it came to deploying the National Guard, whether a governor wants that deployed in their state or not, versus governors having the authority to say, yes, we want the National Guard. And Ohio voters, I think it was, maybe 3 out of 4, something like that, that said that governors should have that capability. Again, we don't like to be told what to do from the federal government. We don't like to be told what to do from the government. And I think that crosses party lines in some ways too. So yeah, there's a lot of things happening in the state that could make the state much more competitive, I think, in 2026 than it has been in presidential elections.
To talk more about just Sherrod Brown's own brand as a Democrat, Sherrod Brown has cut out his own brand, and the dignity of work is a slogan that he uses often. And so to have built that brand with workers and on economic issues, would you say that that approach is right going into a time when many just don't feel like the economy works for them?
I think that this is exactly what every candidate should be leaning into right now. And the question is whether or not they have the credibility to lean into into those issues. So, Sherrod Brown is one who is not afraid to go everywhere in the state, all 88 counties. And that is, I think, going to be critical for him to do well in Ohio, is to talk to voters that are those kind of Trump adjacent voters or Trump voters that maybe don't think so much of the Democratic Party. And he has shown his willingness so like he kind of stood down Joe Biden, for instance, and said, like, yeah, we need another candidate at the top of the ticket. So those types of things, talking about worker protections. And if people feel like government and certainly the private industry is not working for them. To have somebody who's saying, I'm here to help you against, these profiteers, then I think that that's something that can be a winning message in the state. And really, for Brown to kind of close some of those gaps in rural parts of the state that Trump has really been able to run up in presidential elections, where you're seeing a lot of folks come out to vote that maybe weren't voting before, um, to either, demobilize those folks to maybe they just don't care so much about a Houston Brown ticket, or they say, you know what, I'm going to go vote for the Sherrod guy. I don't love the Democrats, but he's a good Democrat. I mean, that's one of the kinds of things that you will find from time to time.
Looking at this gubernatorial race, it's really fascinating for a couple different reasons. We have Vivek Ramaswamy and former director of the Ohio Department of Health, Dr. Amy Acton. Dr. Acton certainly has established her brand in the state's COVID response. Just starting there, do you think that that's something that could work in her favor given she has experience, or could it be something voters may not interpret positively given that there was so much pushback to COVID measures?
You see already that much of the attack against Amy Acton, because she doesn't have an elected background. She's
Right.
got a public background, but she's not run campaigns before. She's not held elective office. So the attacks thus far have all been about COVID, right? And do you remember the lockdowns? Do you remember this? And do you remember, all these kinds of things? Of course, she was appointed by Mike DeWine. So she served in a Republican cabinet, which I think can play well for independent voters. And again, the question is, are they going to be stimulated and mobilized to turn out to vote? It's always a big question. Those people that are, lean a little right or lean a little left, do they actually show up to vote? They tend to not show up in the same levels as partisans, obviously. So that might be a message, particularly in an environment where people don't like the polarization, where people don't like that, they believe that political violence is a problem, and acting is kind of coming at them from a more authentic perspective, and not have held elective office before. So the contrast here is interesting because I've been talking throughout this interview about how Ohioans like, populist candidates. And part of that would be that, we're a little leery of elected officials. And for the governor's race, it would appear that we're going to have two folks that the two top candidates as of today have never held elective office, but they're coming at it from very different perspectives. One being a business person, one being coming from the medical profession. How does that play in the minds of voters that are not strong Democrats or strong Republicans? If the environment is that, corporate politics and billionaires are taking advantage of us, that might not help Ramaswamy so much. And in fact, I think that that's kind of been the tack that Acton's campaign is taking against him.
For sure.
That I think I just saw something the other day where, he had a post somewhere in the mountains, and it certainly wasn't Ohio, and he was like, America's beautiful or something like that. And she says, yeah, so is Ohio. That doesn't look like Ohio to me. Like, you're
Yeah.
not one of us.
I think the
So
line was Ohio is beautiful around this time of year.
yes, and it clearly wasn't Ohio, right? And so this is, the perspective she's certainly going to take. And again, I think that can play well in a state like Ohio. So how much do people lean into COVID versus, and there's going to be people that are also going to say, you know what, she saved lives, right? Like, this was a good thing. Thank goodness, working across party lines, we'd like to be able to see that. And then there's going to be folks that are just like, nobody wants to go back to those years, right? Like, we don't like even thinking about the years of COVID. Um, how many of those people are persuadable? That's a big question mark to me.
Yeah.
Uh, is that something that works, or is that you're just talking to those who are already converted to not vote for in the first place? Big question mark.
And that definitely can be interpreted in many different ways because there will be people that see the COVID response and say Ohio kind of led in that sense. And so there may be those who look at it from that angle, and then those who may be looking at it from maybe the business perspective, who had maybe owned a small business or something of that nature. There may be that too. So this really could play in either direction. But also to look at her opponent, Vivek Ramaswamy, he's made a name for himself in national Republican politics. He certainly had somewhat of a role in the Department of Government Efficiency that the president had launched but was disbanded. So, kind of speak to Vivek Ramaswamy's image and what exactly Ohio voters may be seeing in him thus far.
So it's a little surprising that you find, so when we ask favorability ratings for a lot of folks, Acton has a positive favorability, but there's still a lot of people that have no real opinion of her. Ramaswamy, more people know who he is. And those that know who he is, he's got a negative favorability rating among those who know who he is. But there's still a lot of people that don't know who he is. People like you and me that are paying attention to politics all the time are like, who are these people? But they do exist. So how, what the picture is that's painted of him, is he somebody so is he somebody that can be trustworthy? Is he a real Ohioan? Is he for workers? So he's willing to go anywhere and talk to anyone, which is a really good quality in a politician. I just mentioned that about Sherrod Brown. He's willing to have difficult conversations with people that don't agree with him. Again, very good quality for a candidate. But sometimes that might expose you to some blind spots too. And so, if he's not willing to support unions, for instance, and says, I don't support unions for X, Y, and Z reasons, there might be a number of folks that are union voters that have supported Trump in the past in a Republican Party that might say, wait a sec, this is a bridge too far, especially if they're not feeling good about tariffs, so national politics, and they're not feeling good about the economy. So that could be a little tricky dance for Ramaswamy. He has certainly tied himself at the hip with Donald Trump. I mean, once you get that endorsement, he's the king in Ohio endorsements. JD Vance can owe his Senate career, now his vice presidency, to Trump's endorsement. So I think that depending on where we're at a year from now, Mike DeWine has kind of danced around Trump and did very well in the state, right? So there's different ways to approach it, but it would be really difficult for Ramaswamy to not fully, embrace that Trump endorsement. And so if things are going well as far as Trump goes, Ramaswamy's in a much better spot. If they're not, then he's going to be tricky for him, I think.
So, do you think that if it seems that things are not going in the right direction, as so far Ohioans feel they aren't, will Ramaswamy be able to create that distance in just this short amount of time in order to kind of build out and carve out his own identity?
I think having a pivot would be really difficult for Ramaswamy given his embrace thus far of Trump. And now he might be able to, because he is very articulate and able to communicate to lots of different audiences. So he may be able to find ways to find some space, some distance. But I think again that would be like it's kind of funny, the old mystery shows where you know who did it. And you try and figure out like how are they going to get out of this problem. It could be something like that. So at the end of the day, this midterm will be largely about Donald Trump and not really even about the candidates themselves. Not to say that won't have an effect. These individuals do matter. You saw it, I think, even, in the race for JD Vance and Tim Ryan a few years back. Vance tied himself to Trump, did not do as well as Mike DeWine did in that same election. Part of that was probably Trump. Part of that was also part of the candidacy of DeWine and Vance. So the individuals matter, but there's a bigger structure here that's speaking more directly to just the brands. Which soap am I going to buy, the Republican or the Democrat?
And it really took me back for you to mention that Senate race. I recall covering it, and to think that next year that will have been 4 years ago is beyond me. But even going back to the poll, there are some issues of overlap that I want to cover as well. One of them being Jeffrey Epstein and the investigative files relating to him, and another being political violence, where people feel that both are serious concerns.
Yeah, so we developed this poll, weeks and weeks and weeks ago, and you never know like what's still going to be kind of punchy in the news and this kind of thing. But it was worth considering, we thought, to kind of see like, well, what are Ohioans' views on these various issues relating to Jeffrey Epstein? It doesn't seem to be something that is affecting people's daily lives, and yet Ohioans, and my sense is that Americans have a lot that they are paying attention to this as an issue. And I think the big takeaway is that most people think that there is some kind of cover up. Most people think that the cover up is there to support elites and moneyed interests. Most people think that we're never going to find the truth. And think that it's an important issue, that people deserve accountability for these things, and they're not happy with the way that the Trump administration has handled it. And so you take all of these things together, and it speaks to kind of a conspiracy-laden perspective that people have about politics more generally. That, again, coming back to that populism, that it's not out for the little guy. It's big interests that kind of run the day. So I think that that's kind of the big takeaway from what we found out of the Epstein set of questions. And then, yeah, we asked questions on political violence, whether or not, is it acceptable to fire people because of their political views that they make on social media? That is it acceptable to express satisfaction publicly when harm comes to a political opponent? And a lot of Ohioans, at least in our poll, find that they're really fearful of political violence. That they think it's a real phenomenon. They're concerned about it. They don't think that the Charlie Kirk assassination was an isolated incident. That so polarization is something that I think a lot of Ohioans are really concerned about. I think that they think the causes of it are probably different. And that speaks again to, these bubbles that Democrats and Republicans find themselves in. So, yeah, I didn't take away a lot of enthusiasm for myself personally, like for the future. I think that there's a lot of concern out there that things are bad and may get worse. So that's not a good place to be.
Given 2026, it's next year, and Ohioans are going to have some time to really, I guess, build their own consensus on these things. What do you expect to be the central concerns and considerations of Ohioans as they prepare to make a decision next year?
So I do think so. Let's pull, I've talked about Trump and his shadow. Let's just kind of pull like what will be some of the issues that folks will be focused on. I think the economy front and center. Everybody's always worried about, we talked about the price of eggs, last fall. It'll be the price of something, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so people are concerned about the economy. It doesn't appear that people are feeling real confident about the economy right now. So I think that that'll be one. Tied to that will be tariffs. I think that the tariff question is looming. I think that there's still a lot of questions about that. Uh, there's been a lot of uncertainty about tariffs because of the administration has changed its mind on multiple occasions to kind of say we're going to tariff at this level and then pulls it back. That's not an environment in the business community that is a helpful environment. And I think that that's created a lot of uncertainty among normal people as well, right? So I think that that'll be something to kind of keep our eyes on. I think that, this question on, ICE in the streets or National Guard in the streets, I think that this question of threats to democracy, it's not going to be an issue that Republicans are going to be moved on, but it could be an issue, it certainly will be an issue that Democrats are feeling really strongly about. The question is, does this get to independents as well? So like, are you concerned that somebody adjacent to you could be swept up in this environment? And that was something that we did see a little bit of difference on most issues on our crosstabs when we kind of broke it down by party, race, gender, age, education. It was partisanship that was kind of the big divide on virtually every issue, except when it came to ICE. When it came to ICE and the National Guard, you saw that white, non-white, there was an increase among non-white respondents in our poll on not liking the actions of ICE in the streets of the United States. And so I think that that kind of speaks to kind of that adjacent issue, right? Like, so who else might get kind of, collateral damage in some of these policies. So if we start to find more instances of American citizens that have been, attacked wrongly through these policies, or God forbid somebody dies as a result of these kinds of issues, I mean, those will be pretty significant issues kind of moving forward that speak to kind of these larger concerns over the democratic process.
Dr. Robert Alexander, professor of political science at Bowling Green State University, thanks for joining me to break down this poll.
Thanks so much, Jaden, for having me.